And it wasn't easy or fast, but it was so worth it. Not just because your relationship with yourself improves, but you can truly start to work towards just enjoying the people around you in all their forms. Welcome to the Love Your Brain podcast, the podcast designed for everyday people who are ready to hop off the negative thought hamster wheel and enjoy a less hostile environment in their own brains. Our brains are where we live our entire lives, and I'm on a mission to help people see that they have everything they need to make it a happier place to be. So join us for this episode of the Love Your Brain podcast. Let's get started. Welcome to this week's episode. We all have those people in our lives that get under our skin, irritate us a little bit. Maybe it's how they act, maybe it's how they talk, or maybe it's how they treat people. Most of us experience irritation with other humans in our lives on a regular basis. But if you're someone who's listening and thinking, well, I don't think there's anyone who irritates me, well, awesome. We're going to talk about you later too. But first up, talking about people who irritate us. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about this topic is number one, because sometimes these irritating people can consume our brains, even when we're not with them. Like, why are they like that? Why can't they just stop being that way? Don't they understand how irritating that is? Or we start to dread having to engage with them because they just drive us so nuts and you really dislike having to interact with them. It's not enjoyable to have those thoughts going on in our brains for sure, but there is something that you can do about it, and we'll talk about that a bit today. The second reason I wanted to cover this topic is because these individuals in our lives that drive us nuts are super valuable teachers for us, and I'm really excited to help you see why. It can feel really empowering to take something that feels negative and then unpack it in a way where you can see how you can use that negative feeling to make some positive changes going forward. Now, this topic is honestly one that might take you a moment to wrap your head around because it's not right out the gate going to feel good. And why is that? It's because what you may discover might challenge your thoughts about yourself in a way that could feel a little uncomfortable. But I promise it won't last. If you make it all the way to the end of the podcast and walk through the whole exercise, you might actually feel a lot more empowered and maybe a little less irritated. So let's start off with the basis of all of this, and that's the why. Why do certain people or behaviors irritate us? Well, because often those people are behaving in a way that triggers a sensitive spot for us. And the reason it's sensitive is because it's a behavior we dislike in ourselves. So, yes, you heard me right. The reason that person is likely irritating you is because they're acting like you. Or maybe they're acting in a way you want to act, but don't let yourself because you don't like that part of yourself. So, for example, that person who is really strict about everything has to be just right. Maybe they're a little OCD. Put them up next to someone who is all over the place, disorganized, not paying attention to the details, leaving things half finished. Why do you think the perfectionist might be irritated by the disorganized person? You might be thinking, well, they're irritated because they like things perfect and the disorganized person is messing things up for them, which may be a little of that too. But really, what's happening here is that the disorganized person's lack of caring for details is making the perfectionist feel uncomfortable because they're not okay with that part in themselves. And they are likely really judgmental of that part of who they are. And how do I know this to be true? Well, because after working with people for over 20 years, I've seen this happen in a million different scenarios. It plays out the same every time. Once the perfectionist does the work on themselves to create a better relationship with who they are, they often feel a whole lot less bothered by the disorganized people in their lives. A huge part of how we interpret the world around us is through this lens of how we see ourselves. If we are hard on ourselves, judgmental, and critical, we will be that same way towards those around us. And maybe not always in practice, but this is the lens that we're seeing the world through. If we're seeing ourselves as being negative, we're seeing the world as negative. And if you piece that out by behaviors, if we see certain behaviors in ourselves that are negative, we're going to see that behavior in others as negative as well. So, have you ever had that experience where if your friend looks at that person that's irritating you, they're like, I don't get it. Like, why is this such a big deal for you? And you're like, oh my gosh, but it's so frustrating. Doesn't it frustrate you? And they're like, no. not at all. They might not understand in the least bit why that person irritates you. Like, why would something like that even bother you? Well, that's because they have a completely different set of insecurities or negative self talk than you do. Their lens is completely different. See how that works? Each person could be irritated by different people based off of their own negative self image. Now, of course, there are certain things that a lot of us carry around. And so there could be some similarities and some things that are very often seen in multiple people. But overall, you're also going to see a lot of differences. But here is the good news. That person who is irritating you isn't really the problem, right? The problem is actually something you can completely fix. Now, I'm not going to say it's always easy, but it is in your control, which for me always feels better than when I'm in a situation where it seems like I have no power to make it better. So hopefully that's good news for you as well. And really, there's no downsides to this work of creating a better relationship with ourselves, a healthier environment in our brains. So it's worthwhile work as well. And if you are someone who has just a ton of people in your life that drive you nuts, well, great. You have even more to gain by doing this work because likely you are someone who has a lot of negative thoughts about yourself going through your brain at any given point. And these thoughts don't just come out of nowhere. These are usually thoughts that got put there at some point in your life, right? For example, maybe you are the perfectionist person and you were raised by someone who was really critical and judgmental, and they raised you in a critical and judgmental environment where these really high standards were held for your behavior. And then likely you grew up to be someone who now has this inner dialogue going on in your brain telling you all the things you need to do perfect and that you need to hit this high standard. If not, you're not a good person. But let's also look on the flip side. What if you are someone who feels like you don't really have people in your life that irritate you? Well, the truth is, you probably have a really great relationship with yourself, which, bravo, we can all hope to get there. Unfortunately, though, you do have to live in a world with other people who are irritated. And there are likely circumstances where people may be getting irritated with you and you just don't understand why. Well, now we have the answer, right? We know that they are likely seeing something in your behavior that they don't like in themselves. It's not that there's anything inherently wrong with you, it's just that there's something going on in their brain that they need to sort out. And that goes for everyone. More good news for everyone. When you can sense someone is irritated with you, there's a good chance there isn't anything inherently wrong with you either. Your behavior is just likely bumping into an insecurity or a critical part of the other person. Think about how when someone's saying that they're worried about what people think about them, and then you hear the other person respond by saying, everyone's thinking a whole lot more about themselves than you. Well, that is actually totally true because even when they think they're having a thought about another person, it's actually a thought about themselves. But let's get into the details here because I'm sure by now you're running through a list of people in your own head like, yeah, that person drives me nuts, but nothing about that seems to have anything to do with me. So let's try and gain some tools on how to figure out the root issue. So let's take one that might be hard to spot. Say you're feeling irritated by someone who's always late. Well, at first glance, it's easy to say, well, they just shouldn't behave that way. Being late all the time isn't respectful, it's just wrong. Well, there could be some truth to that. But if they're irritating you, it might be worth asking yourself some questions. And here are some examples. When I'm late, how do I treat myself or think about myself? Am I super critical in those circumstances? Or maybe you're never late. If you're ever even close to running behind, what is the dialogue going on in your head? Is it really negative? Is that dialogue really mean to yourself? And then take that a step further. What would it look like to show yourself some grace in that area? What if it was okay for you to be late once in a while? Are you someone who needs to work on cutting yourself some slack, allowing room for errors, allowing room for being late once in a while? Because I'm telling you, the tension you're holding in that space, where you're holding yourself to such a strict, intense line, when someone bumps into it, you're going to feel it every time. But once you release a bit of that tension on that line, if someone bumps into it, you may barely feel it. And that's how it is when we hold ourselves to really strong, intense standards. Often we expect others to do that as well. And when they don't, it actually pains us to interact with them because we, in our own energy, are holding ourselves to such a high standard. Now, don't get me wrong, it's okay to perform at a high level, to be on time all the time, or to do things really well. What I'm talking about is what's going on in your brain around that behavior, that tension. If you could not perform well or not do something just right, what would happen in your brain? This is where the problem stems. If you are someone where it would trigger some intense negative thoughts or negative self talk if you were late, then that might be worth working on. Or if you're someone that performs really well, but if you couldn't for some reason, you feel like it wouldn't be that big of a deal, then you probably not only have a fairly healthy relationship with yourself, but you're also likely not often irritated by those around you. So, when you're trying to unpack why someone is irritating you, just try by starting to ask yourself some questions around it. Like, do I try really hard not to behave that way that person is behaving because I think it's wrong? Or when I do act the way that they're acting, do I have negative self talk that's happening in my own brain around that behavior? And sometimes you might have to sit with this unpacking a bit because unfortunately, over time, we develop these intense absolutes that can really cloud our vision. And when that happens, it's really easy to see any behavior as simply good or bad, when in reality, it's neither. And the intense emotion you're having about it is more so because you're judging it in some way. But once you find out the culprit, what is that thing that I don't like about myself or the thing that I judge in myself in some way? Then you can work towards softening it a bit. Like, what would it look like to give myself some grace in that area? What if I was softer to myself? What would it feel like to actually like that behavior in myself, or at least to even accept it as something neutral? I can tell you personally, I had a point in my 20s where I felt very sure about everything. I was very sure about what I thought life should look like for not only myself, but for the people around me. Yes, I'm outing myself here. I was probably not someone that everyone loved to be around, but I was also irritated by a fair amount of the people. And I don't think I was openly irritated, like I wasn't verbally expressing all the time, like, I dislike you, you're driving me nuts. But I would have thoughts about others' behaviors and lots of dialogue around, well, if they just did X, Y, or Z, they wouldn't have that problem. Or if they would just stop doing this or that, then they would feel so much better. It probably didn't look mean or judgy because I honestly had good intentions, but I was internally unhappy. I was having a constant rub up against people around me who were all loosey goosey, and I was living up to this very strict standard. And those two things felt uncomfortable together, and I felt irritated. I didn't work on myself with the intent to fix that specifically, but it was only afterwards, after I had really started working on repairing my relationship with myself, which honestly is still a work in progress. But it was only after did I start to soften with others. And it didn't make me feel so uncomfortable to have people around me who I would consider to be disorganized or chaotic or just living a whole different life than I was because I changed the dialogue in my own brain. I really worked on changing from being super self critical and honestly just talking mean to myself to being much softer, to really having compassion for myself, to showing some grace for myself, to softening a bit of that tension to that standard I held myself to. And it was only then that I really was able to see not only my relationship with myself change, but also with how I related to others. And it wasn't easy or fast, but it was so worth it. Not just because your relationship with yourself improves, but you can truly start to work towards just enjoying the people around you in all their forms. And life, it just feels better when you don't have to feel irritated with people as much. Now, I'm not saying I adore every human I encounter, but I can usually find the neutrality in them and I can appreciate them for who they are. To me, what that looks like is seeing someone who maybe I don't enjoy a lot, but being able to also say, someone else out there probably adores this person. And then in turn, I appreciate them for that value that they bring to the world. They are exactly what someone else needs, enjoys, and adores. So to me, they are valuable, even if they're not my cup of tea. So let's just do a recap. If you have someone in your life that is irritating you, the first step is to step back, figure out where the rub is happening. What is that specific area, that specific behavior that really rubs you wrong, that thing that really irritates you? Maybe they're irresponsible or loud or they're not a good listener. Pinpoint what that exact behavior is that's driving you nuts. From that point, then we move to asking ourselves some questions. Questions like, is there an attribute in yourself similar to that you might be harsh with? Do you judge yourself if you act in that way? If you were to behave the way that they're behaving, what would be the dialogue going through your brain? Or is this a behavior maybe that you see in yourself, but you keep it hidden because you're embarrassed or ashamed of it? Is there some part of you that you can see in this other person that you just don't like? From that point, we move to how we can be softer with ourselves in that area. How can we show ourselves a little bit of grace? How can we change the dialogue in our brains so that we're kinder to ourselves, less mean, less critical? And that's it. That's the work. It's not super complicated, but what it takes is really trying to hone in, sit down with what you're thinking about others, how it's triggering you, and what the root cause of that is. And you might find some things that you can work on with your relationship with yourself that could be total game changers. And I hope you do. I know it's not fun to put the magnifying glass on our own flaws, but hopefully this helped you to see how you can take the power back when you're feeling irritated and you can actually start working towards creating an even better relationship with yourself, which will in turn improve the relationships around you. Have a great week. I hope you found something helpful here today on the Love Your Brain podcast. Maybe a laugh or a feeling of validation, or maybe just a few moments to have company while you do your laundry. Whatever you take from it, I hope you enjoyed your time and leave feeling empowered to be more you every day. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on the next episode, and leave a review. I'd love to hear what you think. Have a great one.